Thank you. Again, welcome to the program. I see many new people or more attendees are joining. And we have a couple of executive committee members here. And can you turn on the video? I can see Govind Gopal and our Vice President, Cultural Vice President, and also Soundarya Chandran, our convener here. In the way of introduction, I'm Vanakkam again. I'm Saravana Sudandira and VP Administration for the Bay Area Tamil Mandram 2021. And we have our treasurer coming online. I'm going to promote, but in the meantime, I request Govind Gopal to start his introduction and say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Sundra. Anevarukkum vanakkam. Tamil Mandram has been doing this good college planning session last many years. We want to thank our sponsor, UCEZ, especially Vinny Gupta and Vaidish. They have been doing every year this useful information for high school and college students and planning from education and other things, right? Sondra also, even though she is in this year, she has been doing many years. I appreciate it, and this is very useful information for Tamil and other community who's listening here. And thank you, Vaidish. Thank you, everyone. Listeners, if you have any question, you can post it in the YouTube comment window, and our team will address it. Thank you.
Yeah, for now, post it in the Q&A because YouTube is a little hard to get because we are monitoring the Zoom Q&A very actively. Thank you, Govind, for mentioning that actually. Yeah. Thank you, Govind. And Oli Arivoli is here, our treasurer.
Yeah, hello. First of all, good evening, everyone. First of all, thanks a lot for spending your valuable time on a Saturday evening. And this is a very useful program, and we are very happy about it. And thanks a lot for UCEZ, with New York Life, college funding. Plus, we have our Vaidish Koladi, Vinny Gupta, and then Chris Sharp, and our VP Administrative VP, right? Mrs. Sudandra. She has been doing it for the past 5 years, I believe. Okay, it's a very thankless job, thankless opportunity. My daughter's 7th grade, so we are pretty soon. We are into this. We'll be into this mix, and so I'm here to listen and learn a lot and then take all the notes. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Convener Soundarya.
Yeah, thank you, Sundara. And sorry, I am not going to be on video because I'm outside and I'm on my phone. Actually, thank you for all the presenters to begin with, and looking forward to your presentation today about all the college planning and to the points raised by the other EC members. This looks like a successful event that has been happening for the past several years. And I'm glad that Tamil Mandram is one of the leaders in bringing this to the forefront and helping college students to plan for their future. So thank you again, and welcome all the joinees and attendees. Thank you.
Thank you, Soundarya. And going into the program, I would like to say, as many people mentioned, this has been going on. This is the 6th year. And what we do is we understand preparing for the college academic side is really important, and also the extracurricular is also important. But there are other complementing aspects that we cannot forget. So we make it a more comprehensive program by bringing the supportive element to it. In this case today, we are also having the funding, college funding aspect, which we cannot forget. It's the core how we can support the kids go through college. And we used to have, and it is going to be coming because this is just the first of the session for this year. So we anticipate or look out for more college planning event coming. And we are going to be bringing in our popular college student panel. And also, given the circumstances, it is very traumatic for kids and equally for parents too in handling the COVID situation and everything. So we are looking to bring counselors and the emotional support people, our experts, to have a discussion with us. So look out for that. That's going to be part of the upcoming college planning seminars. And today we are going to have the college planning focus discussion or presentation from UCEC. And then we are also going to have, it's the second part of it is on college funding. So I will go briefly into, we'll provide an introduction and then directly go into the program. In terms of, so UCEC has been our sponsor for many years. Thank you. And also given their expertise, we are bringing them on board to give you a presentation and share their knowledge to help our community. And in UCEC, in terms of our panelists, we have two members, Vinny Gupta and Chris Short, but UCEC co-founders, two of the founders are here with us, Vaidis Koladi, who's also a BATM member, Vanakkam Vaidis, and Vinny Gupta is another co-founder. And I would like to welcome them on behalf of Bay Area Tamil Mandram. And in the way of introduction, Vinny Gupta, president of UCEC College Admissions Academy, is considered to be a thought leader in college admissions, and he has been featured in national media across the country. And he sought after, and with the Vaidis and Vinny Gupta's leadership, UCEC has been expanded and is expanding and becoming a really comprehensive source of support and our service provider for college admission. So I would like to, that's Vinny Gupta. Welcome, Vinny. And we have from UCEC, Chris Sharp, another expert. They have a special guest today. He is an expert with them, with the UCEC. He's former admissions director from Carnegie Mellon University, so no less. And his computer science program is ranked number 3 in the country. And Chris is the lead for UCEC's computer science pathway, given his background. And this is a real solid expertise here in the room. And given how the Indian community is generally looking into exploring more and more on the computer science area, we thought about it and we brought Chris to be a panelist today. And with that, I would like to actually turn it over to the panelists, Vinny and Chris. And this is going to be going for about an hour overall, this session. And I expect Vinny and Chris to share a few points on or the complexities or what is needed for college preparation, but it is going to be in a little different style this year or this time. We used to have more on a PowerPoint presentation and then have a Q&A answered, but it is going to be more on a conversation basis. Given the issues, they are going to be having a conversation and there will be 1 or 2 slides presented. And this section is going to be in YouTube. But if you have any questions, please feel free to post it here. And we do want you to ask questions, and we will be moderating the question for the second half of the program. And after the UCEC session, we will be talking about the college funding. At that time, we'll be presenting and introducing the New York Life panelists. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Vinny. Thank you.
So thank you, Sutantara, for your partnership over the last 5 or 6 years. It's been a good learning for our team. But before I get started, I wanted to invite my co-founder, Vaidis Koladi, who grew up in Tamil Nadu. And like you said, he's a member of the Bay Area Tamil Mandram, just to say a few words to our guest today before Chris and I jump into the content for today.
எல்லாருக்கும் வணக்கம். Sundra Govindella சொன்ன மாதிரி, I think I'll just talk briefly in Tamil for like 2 minutes. இது வந்து நானும் வினி இந்த கம்பெனி ஆரம்பிச்சது 6 years முன்னாடி. It's our personal experience and நம்ம எல்லாமே எல்லா knowledge everything is there, but still a lot of things தெரியாம இருந்தது. ஸோ யாரெல்லாம் என்ன சொன்னாலுமே அது அப்படின்னு நிஜம் நம்பிட்டு we've been trying. ஸோ அந்த இதை மாற்றணுங்கிறதுக்காக தான் பியூர் மிஷன் இஸ் இட்ஸ் லெஃப்ட். இங்கே பிறந்த பசங்க நம்ம பேரண்ட்ஸ் வெளியே படித்தவங்க அவங்க குழந்தைகளுக்கு சப்போர்ட் பண்ணணுங்கிற ஒரே காரணத்துக்காக தான் ஆரம்பிச்சது. ஸோ வி see this as a real service than a business. ஸோ முன்னாடி பே ஏரியா தமிழ் மன்றம் வந்து ரொம்ப நன்றி சொல்ல கடமைப்பட்டிருக்கேன். ஏன்னா அவங்க ஆரம்பத்துலேருந்தே சப்போர்ட் பண்ணியிருக்காங்க. 2 பேருமே மியூச்சுவல் இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட் இருக்கு. அவ்வளோ நல்ல ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஷிப் கிடைச்சிருக்கு. சுதந்திரா, கோவிந்த், குணா, நிறைய பேர் சொல்லிட்டே போகலாம். ஸோ தட்ஸ் சொன்ன மாதிரி இட்ஸ் எனக்கு ரொம்ப பர்சனல். Personally, I feel very connected with the Bay Area Tamil Mandram. So I would like to continue this same thing with Vinny. So we both, want this to be continued forever, and whichever way we can support this community, I am more than happy to do so. So with that, I'll hand it over to Vinny.
Thank you, Vaitish. So some of you might have heard me in the past, and today we are going to do a different format. So we're going to touch upon 2 topics. First, these are the 2 burning topics that our community is grappling with. So the first is, what is happening with the SAT and ACT? How does it impact me and my child? The second question is, like Sutantira said, especially for families in Silicon Valley, and actually a lot of Indian American families across the country, we see that a vast majority of students are applying to computer science major. We are also noticing that while computer science admissions have changed so much, our community is not keeping pace in terms of what our admissions officer really looking for. So I'm extremely honored to have with me Chris Sharp, who Sutantira introduced as a hardcore expert in that field. So what we're going to do is, the format is, I'll give you just a very quick introduction to UC Easy, maybe just 1 more minute to what Vaitish talked about. And then Chris and I would do a conversation format, which we will support with relevant slides at the right time, but mainly it's a conversation. And our goal is not to bore you in listening to us. What we want is to trigger your interest and curiosity so that you jump into the conversation and ask us as many questions as you can. So we would like to leave something like 20 or 25 minutes today just for your questions, because we believe as educators, because both Chris and I are educators, that only when students, in this case you guys, ask questions is when real learning happens. So just a quick very quick overview of UC Easy. Let me share my slide here. Some of you may be confused with our name. It's actually not University of California Made Easy. It's University and College Admissions Made Easy. We support all colleges in the US. Like Vaitish said, he and I founded UC Easy about 7 years back with a very simple mission. For families like ours, simplify the high school journey and college admissions. And today, like Sutantira said, UC Easy, with your support, with the community support, we've done very well. Today, we are possibly the largest college admissions academy in the whole country. We are supporting more than 1,000 students through a team of more than 70 experts. We have 3 different programs. I'll talk about them very briefly towards the end of the discussion today. One program for 8th to 10th graders, where the focus is on student development, to develop the kind of profiles that colleges are looking for. Our core belief is that student development for top colleges, that development is by and large done by the end of 10th grade. In 11th and 12th grade, you simply go through presenting yourself to colleges. In 11th and 12th grade, we help with the actual application process. On the screen, you would see a thumbnail view of our team, which is currently at about 75, where we have student development experts or counselors in grades 8 till 10, and college admissions experts or counselors like Chris in grade 11 and 12. This is the largest team in the Bay Area of any such organization, and possibly the largest today in the United States. So as a part of your community, you should be proud of what Vaitish and I have been able to accomplish. On the screen, you would see a couple of testimonials that I think summarize UC-EC the best. So with that brief introduction, let's jump into the discussion. So again, a little bit about Chris Sharp. The main thing here is that two things. One is that he was responsible for STEM, including computer science admissions at Carnegie Mellon, which is currently ranked #3 computer science program in the country. He knows his stuff. Secondly, he's also working at an elite private high school where he works with highly competitive students. So he's very familiar with the aspirations of our community. So I'm going to stop sharing and invite Chris. So Tantra, so our audience would be able to put me and Chris side by side on their own, right? Okay, so welcome, Chris. So let's start with the first topic today, which is a lot of confusion in what is happening in the world of SAT and ACT, right? So let's start with the first question. Give us, without any interpretation yet, just give us the high level of what is happening. And let's start with alignment on definitions. What does test blind mean and test optional mean?
Yeah, thank you, Vinny, and thank you everybody for the invitation. It's an honor to be here to share information today, to make everybody an informed consumer. As everybody I work with, I really want that to be a great takeaway. But definitions, right? Definitions are incredibly important because it feels like colleges change the lingo as this goes. So test optional, let's start there. Test optional sounds almost exactly what it is. Test optional would be your student may apply to a school that is test optional, meaning your student can decide, meaning your student decides if they want test scores, ACT or SAT, or even AP examination scores to be considered and evaluated when reading their application. So the optional piece means the student has the choice to say they want to present those scores or they do not want to present those scores in terms of when they actually apply to that university. So does it disadvantage them? That's always usually a follow-up. It does not disadvantage them now because more schools have become test optional. Just to give you an idea, before September 2019, already test optional was in place. Over 1,050 colleges actually utilized a form of test optional. So this is not new because of COVID. This is something that has only grown because of COVID. The flip side of that is a term called test free. Test free, on the other hand, means a student can choose to send scores to a school, but the school will never see them. Even if the student spends the money to send the official score report, it is not evaluated anywhere in the process of the evaluation of that student's application. So to give you an idea, the University of California is a free system. So if you see optional, students can present scores, but it's up to them. If you see free, students, even if they present scores, they are not factored in whatsoever and do not impact the student's abilities for admission.
Wow. So that's a lot of factual information. So what we are learning here is that there is a clear trend away from SAT and ACT, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as to what it means specifically for our community. So Chris, from here, if you can educate our audience or inform them, at a high level, what is happening with UCs, because vast majority of our audience today is from California, and what is happening with the other top ranked colleges in the country, Ivy League, Stanford, those, what do we know? So let's not get into interpretation yet. Let's just give our audience hard data that cannot be argued.
Well, it's an easy one there, Vinny. I appreciate the question. So UCs, let's start there. The University of California system is completely test blind. So as I mentioned before, what that definition is, the UCs and the California State Universities are test blind through spring of 2023. So students their test scores play no impact in terms of making decisions. So that's a hard, fast, set rule. There is no interpretation beyond they are test blind. Now, other universities, the second part of that question, most of those universities are now test optional. As of a press release that came out from fairtest.org, a site that actually captures who is test optional and who is not. 2/3 of colleges and universities will not require ACT or SATs this coming year. Now, I say that this coming year because, Vinny, to your point, the UCs have made that statement through 2023. Every other university will make their statement when they are ready to, because that is at a higher level of the Board of Trustees, the president, and the provost office. So this might just be for some schools a yearly announcement, and other schools it might be a 2-year announcement, but it's best to always check the sites. But right now, that's what the private schools and the public flagships are doing on a yearly basis.
Yeah, so for our audience, these are the hard facts. So let me take it from here. And what did we learn? Again, at this point, Chris or I, we're just trying to share with you hard facts. None of this is interpretation that you can discuss with your friends and debate this over a nice whiskey, right? This is hard fact. Okay, so what did we learn from the recently concluded admission cycle for fall 21 admissions, which means these are college students that are going to college this month and next? What we learned is, let me see whether I have a slide to share for you. Give me a second. I'm going to present this. What you see on the, Chris, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is what we saw from the recently concluded cycle. Look at most of us, including me, we thought that because of COVID, there would be a decline in terms of number of applications. Look at what happened to the top 5 University of California campuses. They had record growth in terms of number of applications. When we talk about Ivy Leagues and Stanford and those kind of colleges, their applications went up 20 to 60%. 40% of applicants to these top colleges did not submit SAT or ACT and yet got admitted. And we had a decrease in the overall acceptance rate. This is for the recently concluded application season. I'll let you digest this data for a second. Now, what does this mean? So now I'm going into this is my interpretation and my guidance. This is now going beyond facts because now we're looking into the future. We noticed that a very large number of families are still sticking into the notion of SAT and ACT. It's like it's going to come back, or they're still flying their students into testing centers across the country to take the SAT and ACT. They are still focusing so much on PSAT and all of that stuff. Our judgment at UC-EC, based upon our team has 75 college admission experts with a combined experience of 1,000 years in college admissions. 1,000. Think about that for a number. That's like more than 10 full lives, right? We believe this SAT and ACT boat has sailed. We can have a philosophical discussion about why, but there are 2 big trends here. The first is that there is this huge wave today, a political wave in this country today about equity. And SAT and ACT, a large percentage of people believe is creating an inequity because it's holding back otherwise deserving students who might be living in rural areas, semi-rural areas, where they don't have access to SAT or ACT prep. They don't have access to testing centers. A huge percentage, a huge number of the students are being held back from this process. So what happened last year? If you ask people that even during COVID, why did so many applications go up? One hypothesis, which I believe, and I think Chris does too, is that hordes of students who were otherwise being held back, they came into the college application system. What does this mean for our community? What I'm going to say next might sound controversial, but it's coming from the heart. This is my core belief. You do what you want with that information. Testing is a key strength of our community. Growing up in India, we did test all the time, starting from kindergarten admissions, right? It runs in our DNA. We are so good at testing the IIT entrance exam standardized test, this test, that test. So when we came into this country and we said, oh, college admission system, GPA, we are good at academics, SAT, ACT, hey, we love this. We do this kind of stuff forever. It's almost like we were like a fish that just moved from one pond to another. Now that SAT, ACT, which was protecting us from the other elements of the college admission system, that wall is crumbling. It's a non-trivial change for the community. And until we, especially parents, until we say this is a real trend, we will not start looking at what Chris next is going to talk about in terms of what can you do if SAT and ACT are being de-emphasized. So Chris, let's take the next question for you. So we'll go to computer science in a second, but in terms of overall admissions, now that SAT and ACT are losing emphasis, UCs are simply not going to consider them, like you said. For current seniors who are applying this year, top colleges are test optional. UCs will not consider them. California State University will not consider them. What do they do? What are the top 3 things that they should be focusing on?
Yeah, Vinny, and this is such a great question. And as the numerous conversations I've had with university professionals, it's not a surprise to me, but I think it's really good to share with everybody. And that's when you think of the top 3 things, and most of the shares that I have will be 3 things. It's, what we need is students to look inwards, okay? Not to look at what other students are doing. Students really need to look inwards at themselves and not allow the noise and not allow everything else to affect their decision-making. Students need to explore things freely and be encouraged to, and not feel like they're following a flow chart and or a book that has a magic way to get into X institution. So lots of introspective thinking and a lot of inward thinking. That comes first and foremost to mind. Following a student's passions and going the extra mile. Now, going the extra mile for some students, depending on where they're raised, what opportunities they have around them, can differ. So showcasing in this process, a student being very authentic with their voice and talking about exploration and their exposure to CS for computer science or any STEM field, and the potential of where they want to grow that. So colleges do a lot on trying to look at what the potential of your student is. So it's having a student, again, follow those passions. And then thirdly, broaden the student's approach. I think a lot of this process is run on rankings. And while rankings can be used as a guide, there are so many ranking agencies. They're misleading and they're somewhat subjective. So be open to suggestions of schools that maybe you as a parent are unfamiliar with at this present time, but actually could be incredibly important. So Vinny, do you want me to jump into the slide right here?
Yeah, if you want to, so Tantira, our hostess, she wanted to use some slides if possible for our audience who may be visual learners. So I think this slide, Chris, and then possibly slide points 3 and 4 of who are the students who actually get in, because this will guide our listeners today in terms of what can they focus on.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So this is what I would always call many students who apply to, say, a Carnegie Mellon, an MIT, a Caltech, they are admissible based off, they can do the work. Everybody can do the work. About 85% of them can. However, admissible does not mean admitted, correct? So to be admitted, you have to have more or less a lot of the things you're seeing on the screen. Holistic is a word that we use often. Holistic simply means we look at many sides of your student in this process. So one variable does not necessarily mean it's the only variable we look at. So what you do co-curriculars outside of graded coursework, extracurricular, summer, essays, interviews, demonstrated interests, what all that means is, what does your student do with their free time? How do they advocate for themselves at home? How do they make decisions? How do they make informed decisions? And what sort of voice do they have? And the voice they have will turn into the writing and how they present themselves in the process. And if they're interviewing, the voice that they have will present itself in a Zoom call, just like this, or potentially in person when things get healthier. Now, mixed with that are the GPA, the actual hard transcript, the ACT or the SAT, if they decide to present that information, and courses, meaning the rigor. You're going to hear that word a lot as a parent. The rigor, how difficult was their path? What did they self-select in terms of courses? And then how well did they do? How well did they fare? Did they sustain a high level of performance for, say, a CMU or like institution? What happens after that is a comprehensive review of the co-curriculars and the academics come together. And we decide if that student is right for our community. So just as we were talking about earlier today about communities, colleges are communities themselves. So looking at each one of those orange boxes, they want to make sure the student can do the work so their readiness is there. But they all want to make sure that your student is not just a good college student, but a better college roommate. They very much keep that in mind when they make decisions. The character, what teachers say about your students, and what impact they have at school, around school, or even in their local neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. To further up-level Chris's message, the way I like to present this is that, look at this center box. This is what we are comfortable with. As I mentioned before, GPA still strong. We're talking about college admissions, right? So GPA has to be important. SAT, ACT, that's what we're talking about. That is going down. Rigor of courses still remains. So if you are aspiring to colleges ranked among the top or ranked among the top 60, 70 in the country, something like that, I think that the big message here is, this message was there even last year, but it's become even stronger, that develop these student characteristics that will map onto the left orange box, which we at UC Easy call personal traits of the student. Now, we believe that for certain colleges, the range of the weightage of these personal characteristics could be as high as 70% for some of the Ivy League type colleges. And yet, what we are learning at UC Easy over the last 7 years is that most of us, including me and Vaitish, when we first began this journey as parents, we had no idea about the huge importance of this box. Now, some of you would say, Chris, Vinny, it's easy for you to say all this stuff. It's hard for me to understand. I mean, this sounds like connecting with God somehow because it's so abstract. Unfortunately, it is. And UC Easy has created proprietary programs to help with just that. So, Chris, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and let's on this topic. I think the other slide we can skip. Mm-hmm. Let's see what questions do people have on the topic of the emphasis of SAT and ACT.
Do you want me to go, or you want to pull up and handle it yourself?
We can take that.
Okay.
So, Chris, do you want me to be the traffic cop, or you want to take this yourself?
Well, I can jump right in. I see a question about the UC system is test-free, and that is correct. The UC system will be test-free again through the admission cycle of 2023. Now, we understand as California residents, there's a lot of news that we receive from the UC system. So I still would say stay tuned. The only time a UC campus can solicit a test score is for scholarship purposes. So later in the process, if a UC campus wants to see a student score, they can solicit that from a student if the student decides to share that information. But for the UC system itself, it will not be test optional. It will be test free.
Yeah, and to add to that, UC's the guidance that's coming from them, it seems that they have no intentions of going back to SAT or ACT Again, nobody knows what will happen in the future. UCs haven't given official direction, but it sounds like that they may actually come up with a system of their own. It's all speculation. All right, Chris, next.
Yeah, I could jump into the next one, Vinny. It's
Yeah,
a really
please.
good one because I used to be one of the admission officers.
Hmm.
So does reaching out to admission officers help the chances for your student acceptance to the UC schools? Well, let me answer. I'll add an answer to that for all other schools as well. For the UC schools, there is nobody to reach out to. State mandated system, even if somebody visits a school, reaching out to a UC admission representative has no impact whatsoever. We brought up that term demonstrated interest earlier today. For the UC system, because they're statewide, there is no demonstrated interest. It's a metric-based system on the major or alternate major your student decides, and the quantitative strengths of your student mixed with the co-curriculars. But unfortunately, there is no contact there to levy and to lean on to advocate more for. That being said, for private schools and out-of-state public flagship universities, there are contacts that your student can reach out to. And does that help? Thoughtful communication. Keep that in mind as a parent. Be thoughtful. Do not flood inboxes, because we as admission officers are aware of who reaches out to us maybe too much, and then who reaches out at the right time with thoughtful updates.
All right, so that's an easy one for you, Chris. What percentage of colleges across US are not accepting SAT or ACT scores? Again, I think this will be a two-part answer, test blind and test optional.
Yeah, so as of the exact number, I don't have the exact number, but it's 2/3 officially of institutions made that announcement earlier this year. Now that's 2/3 of college universities. Again, fairtest.org. I encourage everybody to go to that resource. You will be able to pull up live PDF, actually rankings and sheets of what type of schools, liberal arts schools, flagship, and you'll be able to see also the most updated information regarding test optional, test free, etc. It's something I use on the daily, and I encourage everybody to use that as well. And you'll be surprised the names you see on that list. But again, this is the new world we live in. This is the wild, wild west now.
Similar question, the last is MIT and Stanford. They are test optional for now, right?
They are right now. Now, many parents, especially the ones I work with, will still say that they want to present a test score, but trying to find a test center in West Los Angeles, where I live, is incredibly difficult. But both the schools will be test optional. Some other state systems like Georgia Tech and the state of Georgia are not test optional. So as you can see, depending on where you live, which county and what state, it's different around this country, correct? But for those two schools, students will have the ability to apply test optional, but not test free, test optional.
Chris, this is right up your wheelhouse. What would you recommend doing to strengthen your character and be more unique? This you can talk about this all night, right?
I really could. I love stories. You know, when I read at Carnegie Mellon about 55 applications a day. So what we always talked about was we were a left and right brain institution. So unusual combinations pique our interest. Unusual combinations could be playing an instrument, but also loving to code. It could be doing musical theater, but also really enjoying game design. So what can you do about your character? I think allowing your student to be a part of conversations they otherwise would not have been a part of, being an advocate for others, speaking up on things that, being a part of populations that they normally would not be around at school. I think especially from what we've seen play out in the last couple of years in our country, schools are very big on advocacy, allyship, and pieces like that. So I think to strengthen a character is to make your student comfortable, but encourage them to jump into spaces they otherwise would not avoid, but they would stick with what they're comfortable with. So have them put themselves out there more, because that will pay itself forward later in the process when they have to get to the interview stage.
Yeah, to Chris's point, just to make this a little bit more practical and actionable for you, lots of things, and we have a rather, all of this has gone into a program called Accelerator that we have for 8th to 10th grades, this development of what we call personal traits. But as parents, there are some things that you can very easily try. We talk about college essays in 12th grade, and families of seniors at that stage come to a standstill, right? This was like back in India when around board exams, nothing would happen. It doesn't have to be that way. The biggest challenge in writing college essays is students don't have interesting stories to tell. So it's like from an empty well, you cannot pull out water, right? So as parents, I think one of the things that you can easily do is to give them a rich set of life experiences starting whenever, as early as possible, so that they have these rich set of experiences to draw from. I recently wrote a blog last week on just this essay topic. Send us an email. I'll be happy to share that with you. Chris, one more on this topic?
Anything, well, about the topic of stories and storytelling?
Of the topic of SAT and ACT de-emphasis related questions, before we jump on to computer science admissions.
No, I'm glad of the opportunity. The other things that come to mind, just keep this in mind. Every school utilized this in terms of what worked for their process. So this is not uniform across all schools about how this worked. Do we devalue it or do we not? Do we raise it up in our process or do we not? Vinny is right. Access is something that's talked about often. Even though it's talked about often, do all schools still operate with access? What we are discovering is the percentage of students who presented a score in the incoming class, meaning they're freshmen coming this year, for some schools is 70 to 80%. Now that's relatively high. That's not 40%, correct? So some schools, yes, some universities have a higher percentage of students who did present a score, others have a lower percentage. And the students who did submit scores, usually to STEM, CS specifically, they were not in the middle 50% range. You can imagine they were at the 85th to 90th percentile of when they submitted those scores. Students did not feel comfortable submitting a mid 50% to an MIT or a CMU. So out of a 36 you can earn on a math score on an ACT, the student would normally submit a 35 or a 36, just to kind of give you an idea of rounded numbers. So the competition still existed with scores, but if a student did not submit the scores to top tier schools, they most likely presented an incredibly rigorous transcript, somewhere between 7 APs taken and 13, just to kind of give you some bare numbers.
Chris, there's one question which, let's take that. I think it's a really important one. Do extracurriculars and other activities done during senior year help students' chance of admission?
So if they're all added in the senior year and other years prior to were a little emptier and not as busy, it could come across to the application reader that the student had a panic moment and was just trying to do as much as possible. So they were not necessarily doing things out of joy. They were doing things out of regiment and being told maybe what to do. I would say what's beneficial in the senior year is any current activities your student is involved in, where did they grow in those activities? What leadership, how do they help move a process forward? What sort of ways do they grow within their current activities? And if they do add anything in addition to that, it should be because it was fresh and it was new and it wasn't forced. I think application readers understand what looks unauthentic versus what looks like a student really gravitated towards that for a given reason. And that could be research, that could be college courses. But I always say, do not lessen the things that are done over 10th and 11th grade. Find opportunities to grow in them and not having to be a leader. You could be a follower and be incredibly impactful on a college campus. So you don't have to be the head or the co-head or the founder of everything. You simply have to be a part of that movement.
All right, so with that, let's do this. So we'll take, like I said, we'll have plenty more time for questions. But since we have Chris and his, he's so unique in terms of understanding of computer science admissions, and we believe that from our community, it just feels like 70, 80, 90% of students aspire to computer science. So let's talk to Chris. Chris, so question one, what is the reality of computer science admissions? Is this just a little bit harder than it was, or is it like, oh my gosh, what just happened?
So this is a reality. So let's think of it this way. Before COVID, STEM and computer science was growing in popularity at such a high rate. So the reality is computer science across the country and world is impacted. So what I say is impacted, meaning there's a far more demand than there are supply of seats where students can take advantage of going to said university. On top of that, we had COVID and we have COVID. So what happens was students in the last year may have been admitted, but they opted not to go to that university immediately. They took what was called a gap year, or they deferred their enrollment. So what does that mean? If you have a senior this year who's looking to apply to computer science, but say that institution has 50 students who deferred their enrollment who also were admitted to computer science, that means fewer seats are available this year. So it's not just impacted, but the realities are that it's the selectivity is always going to be there, and it's not going to get any easier. And now on the slide, it's very important. I think some telltale signs are some schools that you may not even be aware of, but applying to what's called direct to major, which is something the University of Washington has. When you apply DTM, direct to major, to computer science as an out-of-state student, the actual percentage this past year was 2.4% acceptance rate. I'll repeat that, 2.4%. Purdue, 20% application increase, Illinois, Michigan. These schools that are not the MIT Caltechs, the reality is nobody's looking at those schools, and everybody's obsessing about Stanford, MIT, and CMU. But what's happening at those other schools is they are becoming ever increasingly harder to get into. But everybody's focused on an acceptance rate that fell from 4 to 3, rather than acceptance rates that are falling from 45 down to 22. That's the reality that we're in. And Vinny, I really appreciate the question, because what's happening is wait lists are at an all-time high. Students are applying. There's too much talent out there. Universities have to put students on wait lists. On top of that, wait lists are not clearing, meaning students are getting their hopes up and hoping that a spot opens, and spots are not opening this past year. So that being said, the reality is the ability to storytell your student matters. Answering the college's the why question. Again, I mentioned that before. Why does your student do what they do? How do they involve themselves in what they do? What is their purpose, their intent, and their ingenuity? Those types of things are where we have to be.
Yeah, let's come to that, because I want to actually ask you about what students can do. But on the hard data, just to add to what Chris said, the reason that this slide on your screen is important, this shows the overall, not for a specific major, overall acceptance rate for the Ivy League type colleges and the top UCs. Now, some of you would say, when Chris talked about out of state for University of Washington at 2.4%, let's process that data, because data without context is meaningless, right? Stanford, the last time that they published their acceptance rates was about 4%, Stanford overall. Now, computer science at University of Washington, 2.4%. Harvard overall, 3.4%. Computer science at University of Washington, 2.4%. We just contrasting this, or emphasizing that we tend to look at overall college admissions, meaningless. San Jose State University, for those of you that are in California, infinitely easier to get into a major like psychology, but computer science admissions, we've had students who got into the College of Letters and Science at Berkeley for computer science, did not get into San Jose State's computer science. That is the main message here, is that you cannot, when you talk about a hyper competitive major like computer science, you need to look at acceptance rates for those majors. Last data point, About 20 counselors on our team are what are called external readers of applications for University of California. They attended a UC session where counselors are updated. Last year, for the season that just concluded, if you had a GPA of less than 4, that's pretty much of a straight A student. And if you wanted to aspire to computer science in any UC campus, you were out of luck. This is not, I'm not having any joy in sharing all this, by the way, in this information. But if we aspire to computer science, or if you want to take on a challenge, right, until we know how steep this hill is, how would we train? So let's get that to the second point. Chris, you've been doing this for a while. There is a lot of lack of information about computer science admissions. We just talked about the reality, the hard data of acceptance percentages. What are the top 3 things or the 2 things that you see students and families constantly get blindsided on, which sends them in a wrong direction, so that when the application comes to you, the application is headed in a completely wrong direction?
No, thank you, Vinny. And you're being a truth teller with the earlier information you shared. And I think we value that, because that's what Vinny shared about the other schools. It's easier to get into an Ivy League school than to study computer science in some of these other schools. And that's the reality. But what are students and families unaware of? This is something I love, because I do a lot of myth busting in terms of my my career. What comes to mind would be many students are not educated and families are uneducated in terms of where does computer science live on a university's campus. I think there's a misconception that it's always in mathematics. Meanwhile, the origin of computer science is logic and computation in the field of philosophy and field of humanities. So understanding that if your student just simply applies to a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, they're doing what every student is doing, every single one around this world. Now, what you're unaware of is computer science is offered many different ways throughout many different departments at every institution. Some of the institutions teach it in humanities, some teach it in math, some teach it in the School of Engineering, some teach it in data and information sciences. So how a university, the pedagogy of how they give that information out and how they set up the curriculum and what degrees they offer, that's what you're unaware of. But if your student starts to learn about how it's positioned on the campus, it might actually align to better fit. So there is a Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science. There's a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. Everybody thinks you have to go for the BS, but even Berkeley carries a BA. So there are opportunities to look at data science, informatics, computational biology, computational physics, everything from software engineering to quantum computing right now, AI, machine learning. So what you're unaware of is how broad it can be at a university's campus. And to make sure that you're taking a closer look at that. And at UC Easy, what we try to do and what I try to do with my students is have them educated around all fields of computer science. What touches computer science and how could that impact their application? So that's one thing. The second one is a shocker to many, but it is incredibly important. If you leave anything from this presentation, understand that strengths in the humanities and the arts on your student's transcript have more impact than you would think. So your student taking a higher level math course is great with science courses, but at CMU and MIT and Caltech, we are looking at what English they're in. We're looking at, did they take a foreign language up to maybe a 3rd or a 4th year? We're looking at arts classes. We're looking at government classes. We're looking at the interesting electives that your student chose to take because maybe that topic or that content really spoke to them. So it's not just biochem, physics, and calc nowadays. It is all the spaces that computer science can touch and how your students taking advantage of humanities. Do not fall out of love with the humanities, especially nowadays. And lastly, I would say that the competitiveness of schools, as I mentioned before, that are ranked, say, 20 to 50 in many of the ranking sources is becoming increasingly harder to gain admission to. So while everybody else is focused at looking at CMU and MIT and Caltech, it's okay to look at that, but do not hyper-focus on those. Do pay attention to schools like Worcester Polytech, Stevens Institute of Technology, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, University of Maryland. Look at those schools and take a keen eye to them, because depending on how many years away your student is from graduating high school, those schools, a student may think, oh, I'll get in. They are changing, and they are changing at a rapid rate. University of Massachusetts at Amherst, one of the best data science programs in the world. University of Oregon just added data science. As you can see, the marketplace is changing. But if we ignore those schools that are 20 to 50, we completely miss an opportunity to understand that your student will be happy at many campuses, because many of them do amazing things in CS.
Yeah, just to add to, or maybe just up level what Chris said, every time I hear Chris talk, I learn something. My biggest takeaway, Chris, from one of your webinars that you did was, if I am a admissions officer at Carnegie Mellon, and if I'm looking at your application, if all you have done are courses and activities related to computer science, I'm probably not interested in you. Now, this might come as a shocker to most of our listeners today, because when we come across students aspiring to computer science, they're doing things like heavily coding or artificial intelligence or robotics, internships with a startup, etc. But remember, Chris also said that he's also looking at your personal traits, which are represented through your essays. What else have you done in terms of outside computer science? So it's not just A as an alphabet, it's A plus B. So the bar is pretty high. Now, the key message here is that for all of these things that Chris talked about, the personal traits category, choosing the right activities, a lot of this requires thinking and planning early on, which is where someone like UC Easy comes in. Vaitish or I never say that enroll only in UC Easy. Find someone that you trust, but don't go blind into this process. So Chris, last question on computer science before we open it up to audience questions. What are some of the things, tangible things? I know you've talked about those, but what are some of the tangible things that our audience can do to enhance their competitive profile for computer science admission? I know you've covered a lot of this, maybe just summarize them.
Yeah, I guess 3 points that come to mind. We have to be good listeners in this process. We have to listen to our students and understand what are they saying, and not feel like we're telling our students what they have to do, because that's not how this works. And universities will easily read an application and feel that this was packaged. You're going to hear that word a lot. This student reads like they were packaged to apply here, because they're trying to hit on what they feel that we want to see. So for instance, a student should not look at a dream school and say that they're going to make themselves into a CMU applicant. They're going to make themselves into an MIT applicant, because they're going about it the complete wrong way. What they should be doing is they should be asking themselves, like, what do I want to do? Where am I in my current space? How can I increase skills? How can I increase my knowledge base? But to be themselves. I know it sounds so traditional and elementary, but there are too many students utilizing too many resources from the outside, and they are not being themselves and very genuine with their voice. And the moment we sense that there's somebody else in that application that's not the student's voice, we will deny or waitlist that student on the premise. And I feel that sometimes as parents, we want to do so much for our students, but we also don't want to cut their legs out from them in the 11th hour. We want to make sure that we're lifting them up. The other thing that comes to mind with rigorous curriculum, I want the student to understand that they want to take a rigorous but appropriate curriculum. The word is appropriate that I want to focus in on. And for some students, that's maybe lessening one AP and trying something different that might be in the humanities that may have been an AP. Because having diversification of APs, not just in math and science, incredibly important in this process. And the last point is self-advocacy. The student really trying to practice speaking in a public setting, having them lead conversations when you're with them outside of school. And again, participating in subjects where they normally would shy away from. I just want everybody to have this hypothetical, because during COVID, many high schools in California, especially public high schools, went through pass or fail. Does everybody remember that? Pass or fail rather than having grades? Well, imagine if a college or university and your student could only submit a transcript that had pass or fail on it. How would the school understand who your student is? They would have to read their curriculars, right? Their co-curriculars. How would your student position themselves if there were no marks, no test scores, only passes? Ask yourself your students that question. And I think then you'll learn a little bit more about their story. And as Vinny mentioned before, how they can story tell.
Yeah, excellent, Chris. So before we jump into questions, 3 key messages to summarize both topics today. The impact of de-emphasis of SAT or ACT, and what do you do if you aspire to computer science? If I summarize all the good stuff that Chris said, the first is focus on development of personal traits, and that happens in early grades. Number 2, figure out the why. Why do you want to study computer science? Every single day, I meet with families where it would be, hey, computer science is a lucrative career option, or data science is a lucrative career option. That thinking is not wrong. We grew up with that thinking coming from, say, India. But that thinking is simply not going to convince someone like Chris. He would need to know, why are you really passionate about computer science? And have you not just say it, but prove it through your choices of courses and activities and other things over a 4 or 5 year journey. The third is learn the art of storytelling, which is finally communicated through essays. At UC-EZ, our latest mantra is college essays are the new SAT or ACT. Don't cling on to SAT or ACT. When change happens, there are different people. Some cling on to change. Read a book, which I love. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? There are different types of mice there. One of them embraces change. And at the other end, there's a mouse called Mouse C, who hates change, dislikes change, and say, change, how dare you happen to my life? Don't be that Mouse C. We think that the SAT, ACT is a change. Embrace it and figure out, get ahead of others in terms of what you can do. So those 3 things: early stage holistic development, figure out the why, become an interesting storyteller, because it ultimately goes into college essays. With that, Chris, let's take a few questions.
Yeah, I saw a question in there, Vinny, about does taking APs in 12th grade count? I'm hearing that only 10th and 11th grade GPA counts. Now, what you may be referring to is what's called the University of California GPA. So the UC GPA, they do take into consideration only the summer going into 10th grade through the summer going into 12th grade as what they consider that GPA's calculation methodology to be. Now, there is something new that's happening this year, though, where yes, that GPA will still be between summer of 10th and summer after 11th. However, they will be counting the number of UC approved courses at your student's high school and how many actual classes the student completed that were UC approved. So that is something that will be newer, but I would have your student check with their guidance counselor in terms of which classes offered at the high school are UC approved. But the more UC approved courses your student takes and applies to a UC with will only help their case for admission. Now, outside of the UCs, private universities and other public flagships, they will look at the GPA not between 10th and 11th. They will look at cumulative 9 through 12.
All right, so what do we have here? There was one question from someone about when does the UC-EZ program start? So our formal programs start from 8th grade. And and I'll talk about that in 1 second, but the program, we have 2 specialized programs for students that aspire to computer science, and another similarly highly competitive major, pre-med. And we have specialized pathways starting in 8th grade for those. Chris, any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
I saw the, if a student has taken the SAT, ACT test, how can the scores be used outside of the admission process? And I would say this, it's always look at the data, right? So you have an opportunity as a parent, and students have the opportunity to look at the percentage of students who applied with a test score, and they could see the averages. If a school is test optional, but if your student is applying to CS, and I mentioned before, and they're in that 70th to 80th percentile and above, I would say take a closer look at the incoming data of the freshmen. And those are scores you potentially want to present as part of the process. So it's not used necessarily outside of the process, because your student will be given the decision and the choice to make of, do you want to present scores or do you not? Now, on the application, that is what's called self-reporting. Your student will have an opportunity on the test score section to decide what they actually reveal to colleges. So I always say it's great, and this, I know this happens with UC counselors all the time. Should I present the score or should I not present the score? We have these conversations very often, because each of us know each of these schools incredibly well, and we may just give you our best suggestion based off our institutional knowledge per school, because every school looks at it differently, correct? So you us helping our students understand that, how it plays out, is what we try to do for every one of our conversations.
All right, Chris, if you can answer that question about recommendation letters, and then
let me see.
I just want to take a few questions about advising families on what to do if they want to engage with UCs.
I see it. So what is the best type of teacher to ask for a letter of recommendation? This is probably an incredibly popular spring question. So everybody flocks to, of course, math and science. And yes, one of those should be a math or science teacher. However, many schools like MIT, Caltech, other schools like Harvey Mudd, they will ask for that second teacher to be a humanities teacher. So I know that students will not necessarily have a hard time choosing a math or science teacher, but it should be a teacher that has taught them in the 11th grade. Colleges really want to see that 11th grade teacher, not somebody back in 9th or 10th. So grab that 11th grade or 12th grade math teacher or science teacher, but I would challenge you to not have your student just pick somebody else in STEM. I think having the English, the language, the humanities, the history teacher is of great value. It could even be band, it could be orchestra, because again, we get to see different sides of your student in this process. So that letter will help show me the other sides of your students in that process when it's curriculum unfamiliar to them outside of STEM. So the level, does it have to be an AP teacher? No, it has to be somebody who knows your student. And I would challenge your student by asking them the question, if you're not in Mr. Smith's class, how is that class different when you're not present? What do you bring to that classroom that's so much different? And if you're not in that classroom, what's missing? What do you bring to that conversation?
All right, Chris, that was very helpful. There are several more questions, but we need to end it here. So at this stage, let me just quickly talk about, I have just 2 or 3 minutes to just talk about how to engage with UC-EC. So let me quickly share my slide, and I'll rush through those. But the simplest way to engage with UC-EC is to send an email through our website to info@ucez.com. And Chris, can you see my screen? Okay. So today what you saw is the complexity of the process, especially driven by the changes in SAT. And if you are competing or trying to compete for these majors like computer science or pre-med. So the first thing first, for families like ours, especially if our students are going to public high schools, or if they're going to what we call low-end private high schools, I include places like, say, Basis Independent, et cetera, in that group, as compared to elite high schools, which would charge $50,000 or $60,000 a year. What this slide is showing to you is that there is very little, if any, personalized help available through your public school or your low-end private high school. What UC-EZ offers is personalized one-on-one guidance starting in 8th grade. And we offer a student to counselor ratio, which is an order of magnitude different than what is available at our schools, even better than what elite schools, elite high schools offer. UC-EZ is not a body shop for counselors. We are not an Angie's List where you come for getting a plumber or an electrician. We are the first college admissions virtual school academy, a national academy of the first of its kind in the entire country, where we have proprietary programs in grade 8 till 10 for student development, including programs for specialized program for computer science and pre-med. In 11th and 12th grade, we help students with the actual college applications, college list, resume, essays, financial aid. But we also have lots of other experts in the academy. We have an essay writing program. Remember, Chris talked about the importance of college essays. We have an essay writing program starting in 9th grade where we teach college essay writing. We also have several other types of coaches and experts available in a very unique model with proprietary curriculum and programs. We ourselves don't offer academic tutoring or SAT prep. We have high quality partners we can refer you to. These are the two programs that we have. We also help with transfers from community college to four-year college. This is a very unique program. So again, if your student is in 12th grade, we can still help your student with college list, reviewing your essays, no worries. But if your student is in early grades 9, 10, 11, I would urge you, given the importance of college essays, is to consider our essay writing program, multi-year program, the goal of which is when the student goes into 12th grade, you should have essay writing skills for college essays, confidence, and you would have interesting stories to tell about yourself. On the screen, you have some acceptances of UC-EZ. These are top colleges here, and computer science and engineering here. These are also available on our website. And in case you wanted to learn more about our program, simply email info@ucez.com. So with that, Chris and I are pretty much done. And I want to thank Sutantara and the Bay Area Tamil Mandram for this opportunity to connect with you. Chris and I tried to be very honest and open with you. We started UC-EZ with a mission to help such families. So we are not political in nature. We don't believe in telling people what they want to hear because that doesn't go anywhere. So hopefully this webinar was worth your time. So Tantira, back to you, please.
Thank you, Vinny. Thank you, Chris. This is really helpful. I can see from the questions, and I've learned a lot too because things have changed. Because I have my first kid in UC Santa Barbara, and did learn. I actually jumped into this mainly to learn the complex college admissions process, and BATM helped me with this platform to host the college planning, and I learned a lot in that process myself. And now I can totally see I have another kid coming, and I can see I have to kind of relearn, and this is helpful. It's when as we are helping the community, be who on the host side, whoever is involved are also learning. I can totally see that. So thank you very much. And to the attendees, this portion of the presentation is going to be on the recording, available in YouTube recording. But the next portion, which is college funding, will not be. So please stay and ask all your questions. And we hope to get all the questions answered during that time. With that, thank you again to the UC-EZ team, Vinny Gupta, Chris Sharp, and Vaitis Paladi. And thank you. Now we are switching over to the next part of the webinar, which is college funding. And Bomu, can you project the right people, please? Sorry, Chris, you are on the spotlight. All right. Okay. We would like to welcome our panelists today, Annamalai Palani Jr. And, you know, we have just taking a step back. We have heard so much about the college planning and how to get ready for the colleges, what aspects are they looking for, how to sharpen the skills and get better grades in GPA and all that. And if your student with all that is able to get in, and you need to fund him or her, and that's not a small task. So we definitely, as parents, this is mainly for parents, of course, and parents need to plan ahead, or at least you need to know what the landscape is. And it is not easy. Having gone through that process, and I was in surprise, a couple of colleges, very good ones, we got it, and we could not move forward with that, mainly because of the funding status or the tuition or the overall you know, cost. So planning ahead is important, and we have in our panel here Annamalai Palani Jr. from New York Life, and they're also our sponsors. Thank you, Annamalai Palani. And they are more wholesome, you know, wealth planning experts. But given the focus of our program, he has agreed to focus on college funding. So I'll give a very quick introduction, and I'll turn it over to Annamalai Palani. So Annamalai Palani Jr., he has a degree in economics from Santa Cruz University, and very pleasantly surprised that our younger generation is coming into this. This is more, you know, life supportive areas. And we have heard so much about computer science, but this is also equally important. Just want to point that out. And I'm so glad, you know, our own Tamil community person is, the next generation person is in this, you know, role or in this business. So he has, he's both as a wealth advisor at Eagle Strategies LLC and New York Life Company, and an agent at New York Life. He is extremely passionate about helping Bay Area individuals and families with all areas of financial planning, including protection, retirement, investment, and estate. But college planning at depth has become a huge issue in this country for families. So he has come forward, agreed to, and feels honored to share some knowledge, experience, and resources today on this topic. And it's actually his dad with the same name, Annamalai Palani Sr., and him and Junior are kind of a duo, typically do this. But today he, you know, Annamalai Palani Jr. has agreed to do this presentation. With that, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sudhandara, and entire Tamil Mandram for having us. And I also want to thank Vinny and Chris and Vaitish, a part of the UC Easy team. I think that there's so much noise out there in terms of everything, but specifically with college admissions, and they were able to break it down in a concise manner and kind of clarify things, right? And so that's really what I'm here, and my dad, Appa, is here to do as well, is to clarify in our area of specialty, which is wealth advising, but specifically college funding today, right? There's a lot of noise out there in terms of how do we invest for the future? What does debt look like in terms of student debt? What is the landscape? And then also, what is the inflation like? Inflation in this area is actually a little bit different than general US economy inflation. And so that's something that you as a parent need to be aware of, because your kids today, you know, may not be in the college age range, but 8 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe 10, 15 years from now, they'll be going to college. And the cost at that point will be different than it is today. So that's really the presentation today. And I'll share my slides in a moment in terms of breaking down how can you plan ahead for all the different things that come along with this. So like Sundara said, we are a wealth advising firm, part of Eagle Strategies, NyLife Securities LLC, as well as agents for New York Life Insurance Company. And so we'll have a slide at the end to talk about how to connect with us, but let's jump right into the information. So the world of student loans, right? Most most new grads that just finished college and are entering the workforce have some level of student debt. Some of them, and I can attest to this even with my own friend group, I'm one of the few that graduated without student debt. And that's because my parents planned ahead. They planned ahead and was consistent with the investments, consistent with keeping track of how much they need to put away and how much it is going to cost to fund that. So that's the information we want to bring to everyone here. It is very scary, but with the proper planning, it can get done. So here are some facts. As of June 2018, there's $1.52 trillion in total US student loan debt. Over 44 million Americans have some form of student loan debt, making it the second largest source of consumer debt behind home mortgages. Research, this is a really key point. Research shows how the student loan debt actually affects your kids when they graduate from college. And it's found that normal financial behavior is affected by the stress of having to pay off the student loan debt as soon as they enter the real world. So some of those behaviors change because of the student loan debt, and that includes lower participation in their employer-sponsored retirement plan, such as the 401k, ESPP, RSU plan, declining marriage rates, waiting longer to have children, and I think waiting longer to also own a house plays a part into this as well, and increasing demand for smaller, more affordable homes. Not only this, but student loan debt is increasing as the college tuition cost also increases. So the core college cost consists of tuition, fees, and room and board. And these are the main costs that people should really take into consideration. Naturally, there are a host of other expenses as well, such as textbooks, living expenses, travel to and from school. All of that is case by case. It really just depends on which school you end up applying for and getting into. But it's important to note that what you see on the screen here are actually annual figures. So multiply that by 4 and you'll get the average of what each of these categories costs for your child to go through from start to finish until graduation. The other note I want to make is specifically for our Bay Area Tamil Mandram is that everything you see on the screen here is national averages, right? So that's other states, other 49 states, including California. But if we look at just California or just Bay Area, the numbers are much higher than what you see on the screen. So national average, public four-year school, $22,000 approximately. Public four-year school out of state, $38,000. Private nonprofit, $50,000 a year, right? But if we look at it from a California perspective, a couple of schools that are very, very commonly popular to apply for, public school UC Berkeley costs about $45,000 per year, which is around a little under $200,000 total that you need to have ready to go when your student gets in. And then Stanford costs about $75,000 a year, right? So a lot more, $30,000 per year more than a public school such as UC Berkeley. And then of course, the state schools are a little bit lower than the UC schools, probably around $25,000 to $30,000 a year. But once again, I mentioned in the beginning that inflation is different for college tuition than it is for the general US economy, and I'll cover that in a few slides from now. But just make a note to figure out, okay, what are some ideal schools that we want our kids to go to? Of course, it's going to be their choice where they apply, but where can we look at to start reverse engineering how much we need to invest every single year? And then make a note for the end of the call to go ahead and look that up online, right? Have these numbers for yourself. Ultimately, our job is to help you, but we also want you to be empowered to know these numbers for your own kids. So that was the average cost today, but chances are your kids are age 10, age 5, maybe they were just born, maybe you're planning to have another kid soon. These costs are going to change by the time they reach the age of 18 or 17 when they go to college. So the cost of college will likely be much, much higher when they actually attend. The historical cost of college is rising between 5 and 8% each year, 5 and 8% each year. So to put that into perspective, that's far above the current rate of inflation as of 2018, 2.2%. So the US economy's inflation was 2.2% in 2018, but the rising cost of college is actually 5 to 8%. So much, much higher than the general inflation rate. So this is something to also take into account. And so this chart shows tuition today compared with the potential cost in 2036. regardless of where your child goes, you could be looking at tuition for a 4-year education that is more than the average price of a home in the US today. Of course, that's national average. We know California average price of a home is skyrocketing, but that's kind of putting it into context of how much is it actually going to take in capital, in cash, when the time comes to pay for college. And how do we minimize the amount of debt we end up giving to our kids? Because we've seen in the slides prior to that, how the debt can actually negatively affect our children once they graduate from college and start working. So our goal is to always minimize every single client, every family. We want to minimize the debt by planning ahead, right? So it's a fact, like you've seen, that college will most likely cost you. So plan ahead, the earlier, the better. And don't fall within the majority who are not prepared. So only about 10% of parents have enough saved for college by the time their child is 18. And we've seen this in our practice. We have clients who are ready to save, but they may underestimate how much they need to save. They think they're okay because they never looked at what the actual cost is, what's the potential for the inflation adjusted cost, and they never increase their contribution, or they never start the contribution with the correct amount. And because they never take the time to plan, it only takes a little bit of time to plan, they overestimate how much they have. And then the kids are 16, 17 years old, college is right around the corner, and we realize we actually need to take debt to fund 75% of their college or 50% of their college needs. So we want to avoid that at all costs and not be in that 10%. We want to be in the 90% who actually does plan ahead. Waiting until your child is in high school could mean having to save 6 times more per month. And this goes to the point I just made, which is that if we wait, right, there's a time value of money that we have to take advantage of. If we wait too long, you might have to save a lot more per month, stretch your budget at the later years, as opposed to starting now when they're younger, right? Use the time value to your advantage, use their younger age to your advantage, and start funding their plans earlier to maximize on possible returns and possible cash available for them. So waiting to plan can mean an incomplete plan or no plan at all. So I've mentioned tuition rates, and I've mentioned inflation and the debt and how all of that, but we didn't even begin to talk about all the expenses that are incurred before your child even sets foot on the campus, right? Pre-college cost can run into the thousands when you consider standardized testing fees, which of course UC Easy alluded to, test prep courses and materials. These can be hundreds and even thousands of dollars between classes and private tutors. Campus visits, will you be traveling out of state to visit the college? That's going to cost some money. How much do you think you'll be spending on gas, hotel stays, airfare, et cetera? The application fee itself, this is probably one of the biggest costs that everyone is aware of, but that we underestimate until the time comes, right? Every single college that you apply to has its own application fee. And then finally, once they're actually in the school, we want to move them in. Are you going to rent a truck? Are you going to have a van to move your child into the dorm? Or will you have to ship everything because they're moving across the country, right? And those costs are not to be taken lightly either. So these are some of the things you also want to consider alongside the actual tuition, the actual room and board, their experience in those 4 years. What about that summer? What about that 1 year before they go to college? That money to plan for all that is going to come out of your pocket. So we can also help plan. We can also help think about how do we put away money to fund that portion before they actually get to the college as well. So we all have aspirations as parents, right? When we think of being a good parent, it means that we have aspirations to provide for our children the best way we can. 74% of parents aspire to cover education expenses for their kids, and 77% aspire to give their kids a better or as good a life as they had. Setting your child up for success is easier said than done, but we're not here to just scare you. That's the last thing we want to do. Rather, we want to show you the facts and guide you through a strategic planning process, right? We want to reverse engineer the data, reverse engineer all the information that we're presenting to you today to create a plan of what actions can we take in the next day, in the next month, in the next year, and in the next 5 years to set our kids up and reduce our own stress when college does roll around, right? We don't want to be in a scrambling panic sort of mode. So let's start let's lead into the conversation about options, right? What can you do, given the data that we just talked about, what can you do as parents? And what are the different options? What are the different investments or savings tools or things to think about to fund college? So you hear a lot about saving for college. In fact, many tools designated for college funding plans are investment tools. A lot of parents we work with in the community, the Tamil community, are concerned with investing for the child's education because investing, of course, incurs some sort of risk. That is true, but there are tools designed to manage that risk and even take advantage of the volatility, the market volatility, to benefit the plan. So a proper college funding plan is really an accumulation plan that consists of saving and investing and should account for the 4 things you see on the slide right here. So number 1, we want to manage and reduce market risk. So in order to earn money, you have to take on some element of managed risk. You want to protect your principal investment and benefit from growth, but you also want growth given the time frame that you have until your child enters college. Taxation is also another thing that we want to be aware of. Taxation of accumulation proceeds and the withdrawals. When you go to pull the money out, how are taxes going to affect that? A lot of money can go to taxes, and that means less available for the actual college expenses. Number 3, availability of the funds for emergencies or other purposes besides education. So as we stated before, there are more things to pay for than the 3 core costs of college. And you want to make sure there's a component of your college plan that will cover expenses outside the core college cost. And lastly, something that people don't generally think about is protection against death or disability for the income earner or the primary breadwinners in the house, or both income earners, both parents in the household. If you're unable to earn income, how can the plan continue to be funded in that income's absence, right? So there are tools we'll go over that account for that variable as well, right? So every situation is unique and there are numerous options available to fund college. So let's look at 4 common options that may work for you. Number 1 is a traditional savings account. Number 2 is a 529 plan. Number 3 is a Coverdell education savings account. And number 4 is a non-traditional tool, cash value life insurance, such as whole life. So these are 4 different tools. Each has their own pros. And so each, we want to spread the money across so that we can make sure that we diversify, but also each one has its own purpose and benefit. And nothing is good or bad until we have something to compare it to. So let's go ahead and jump right into what are the pros and cons of each type of account. So most of us already have a savings account. That's option number 1. It's not a bad idea to set up another savings account specifically for each child's college plan. So this account is your safety net when needed, but generally it will not be your sole college funding plan. When determining the benefit of a savings account for college funding, take into account each of the categories on the screen here for a successful plan. High yield savings accounts generally earn 1 to 2%. However, we all know in the last 1 year what has happened. In today's environment, we're not earning 1 or 2% in our savings account. It's much, much lower. We don't know when it's going to bounce back, but it's more of a safety tool. We're not really going there for the yield as much as we are for the accessibility and for the emergency aspect. So a couple of things to think about. Far left of the screen, you see managing and reducing market risk, very, very low risk with the savings account. Taxation, it uses after-tax dollars and the gains and the interest are taxed, right? Every year, whatever interest you earn, how little it is, whatever that is, you get taxed at the highest marginal tax bracket. Of course, talk to your tax advisor about that, but it's taxed as ordinary income at the end of the year. So it's not fully tax-free or anything like that. It's completely taxable. Available for all expenses and emergencies, and the contributions stop if the income earner dies or loses a source of income naturally, right? Bottom line, it's important to keep money in the savings for emergency and to fund college expenses leading up to the child going to college, but you should look at vehicles that have the potential to earn more than the savings account to fulfill the college funding plan. So let's move on to number 2, option number 2, which is a 529 plan. And this is probably, we get a lot of questions about this. This is probably the most commonly asked question or thought about plan when it comes to college. And so 529 plans are the most widely, maybe the most widely known college funding vehicle. These plans vary state by state, but they allow you to make tax-free deposits for college education expenses. Investment options and time horizon are chosen, and anyone designated can contribute to the plan. It's important to keep in mind that a 529 plan is specific to funding core college expenses that are approved under the plan. So the tuition, room and board, fees, anything associated with your child's actual higher education expenses, that's what you can pull out of here, tax-free. If you or your child would like to use the funds in the account for non-approved expenses, such as a car or fraternity or sorority fees or travel expenses, there could be a 10% penalty and taxes on the earnings. So it's a good idea to have this plan, but it's also a good idea to have additional options set aside for any expenses outside of the core costs that come up. 529s are a practical and valuable way to fund the child's education. There can be a shortfall depending on the market risk you experience or if the primary contributor has a loss of income. The plan is flexible and can be transferred to another child if the original child chooses not to go to college or has a scholarship. So that's another common question that we get in regards to 529 plans is, we have 2 kids. What if the older one, we set the plan up for them? Can we have a joint plan for both kids? No, you have to name the 529 plan for 1 kid per kid, right? The second question is, what if college becomes free, or what if college, what if the older kid gets a scholarship and then we have this money that's locked up in the 529 that's, if we use it for anything else, there's a penalty, right? Then you rewrite the 529 account. You can just change the beneficiary to your second child and then use it for them when they get to the age of 18 or whenever they decide to go to college. The other question was, what if college becomes free somehow with, way the country is trending, or what if the second child also gets a scholarship, right? Then the money is definitely, quote unquote, stuck in this plan. You're going to have to pull it out, and you're going to have to take the 10% penalty. You're going to have to take the taxes on the earnings, right? So that's why we want to make sure we don't put all our eggs in this one basket, because if both kids get scholarships or if college becomes free, then we have this money locked up and we have to incur a penalty to pull it out. So the benefit is to put some amount in here, but we don't want to put all our eggs in this basket either. So it's definitely useful. But we want to make sure we diversify across the other options, right? Third option is the Coverdell Education Savings Account. And this is funded with a cap of $2,000 per year up until the child's 18th birthday. So you can only put $2,000, right? Your IRA account, that's a $6,000 limit. The 401k has a $19,500 limit for retirement. This is a Coverdell Education Fund. $2,000 per year is the max that you can put per child until they turn 18. And this is unique. This is actually a pretty unique plan because you can use this for elementary school, secondary school, and college expenses. So you're not just tied to higher education. You can also use it along the way. If they go to a private school, you can use it towards that or anything associated with elementary and secondary schooling. The option is also similar to a 529 in that the money in the account is earmarked for approved education expenses, in the sense that it has to go towards education, but of course you have the flexibility of elementary school or secondary school. And there could be a penalty if you use it for anything other than the approved expenses. So once again, let's go back to our handy chart here and talk about the 4 different areas. Number 1, managing risk. Just like the 529, this is generally invested in stocks and bonds and mutual funds. And it must be managed by the state plan where issued or a third party, such as an investment firm, such as New York Life. Taxation uses after-tax dollars, and accumulation is tax deferred, just like the 529 plan. Distributions are tax-free when we use it for approved expenses. And once again, that includes elementary school, secondary school, and college expenses. The 529, tax-free distribution if you use it for college or higher education. And there's income limitations for the contributions in this type of plan. And that's something that we can talk about offline. It really depends on your personal income situation. The third aspect, availability for other expenses or emergencies. The money is not limited to just higher education. Like I said, it can be used for any qualified education. And non-qualified withdrawals are subject to penalty, right? So anything outside of education is subject to penalty. Protection against death or loss of income, the contributions, of course, like the 529, like the savings account, they stop if the income earner dies or loses income in some fashion. The bottom line here is a Coverdell ESA or education savings account can be a nice complement to a college funding plan, but may not be your main vehicle to accumulate money for college. There are certain limitations, as you saw from the screen. The funds are available for pre-college educational expenses, which makes getting an early start even more important. Option number 4, the last option, is a non-traditional option. And this is something that people don't generally know about or hear about in mainstream media, which is cash value life insurance, such as whole life. So whole life is unique. It grows guaranteed cash value and has the potential to earn more through non-guaranteed dividends. If structured properly, whole life can be a strong option for a college funding plan. And the other aspect of it, the one thing about this strategy that the other 3 can't say is it's self-completing, meaning that if you're covered by life insurance, whole life will be there to fund your child's education if something happens to you, right? So if your income stops, knock on wood, if something happens, if one of the spouses passes away before your kids go to college, if the plan is structured properly, it can self-complete and pay for college and don't have to worry about saving money anymore because the proceeds from the death benefit will handle that. The policy itself can also be funded by the company potentially if you become disabled and are not able to work. So this is something that you want to look into your employer's benefits, but from our experience, generally whole life is not the option that's available from the employer. It's usually some level of term life, which of course is just death benefit. It does not bring up any tax-free cash value. So this option gives your family peace of mind, knowing that the child's future doesn't have to change if something happens to you. And so let's go through the 4 categories again for option number 4. So managing and reducing market risk. This is not invested in the market. This is a safe vehicle that's completely unrelated, uncorrelated to the market. There's a guaranteed cash value growth and then the potential for the non-guaranteed dividends. Money going in is after-tax dollars. The accumulation is tax deferred and distributions are tax-free if the policy is structured properly. Availability for other expenses and emergencies. Available for any type of college expense and at the discretion of the policy owner. So once again, what that means is, unlike the Coverdell, unlike the 529, this is more like the savings account where you can actually use it for anything, right? You don't have to explain what you're using it for. You can pull the money out, utilize it for any expenses leading up to college or even in college. And the policy loans accrue interest. Of course, that's through the tax-free withdrawals of the loan, which, based on how it's structured, any loan that you take out tax-free is subject to the interest. And then the protection against death or loss of income, the guaranteed life insurance in place in the event of the premium payer's death, right? So you guys are, as parents, we're planning, we're investing for college, we're putting money into a 529, to Coverdell, to savings account, and to the cash value life insurance. As long as we're alive and as long as we are able to go to work, that's a perfectly fine plan. But as soon as the death occurs, as soon as something unexpected happens, what happens to the rest of the college funding, right? Everything you've put in there is available, but in the future contributions are stopped or they're minimized because now there's only one income in the household. So that's what this really protects against. It's kind of like your downside protection in the event of that death occurring. The whole plan is self-completing. Immediately, one check is issued for the cash to be used for college education or for anything else that the family is in need of when they lose that income. And the last point is what I was saying earlier, the premiums can be waived if the premium payer becomes disabled and is unable to work. And that is until the premium payer is available. There is an additional cost for that, but that is also available until age 65 only. So let's go ahead and talk about which option is right for you, right? 4 different things. There's also additional investments that you could do that we haven't covered today, but you may be thinking about which option is right for you and your child. And what we found from working with families in the community, of course, as always, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Having the diversified plan consisting of several options can work best. So when building your plan, a few things to consider, what you see on the screen here. Number 1 is time frame, and that is how long until our kids get to college, which is usually around the age of 18. Setting that time frame first enables us to know how much risk we can take. The second is budget. We all have day-to-day expenses. We all have our own retirements that we're putting money away for, our own investments that we're putting money away for our future when we are older and pulling back from work and we want to live off that income. Based on all of that, what's our budget left over to put away money for college? What can we reduce in our expenses to make sure that we are able to fund those rising tuition costs? Number three is risk tolerance. We don't want to be more risky or less risky than you're comfortable with, right? We want to figure out how much risk can you stomach, because a lot of people, when the market goes down and they haven't planned that risk tolerance questionnaire or risk tolerance conversation, you're scrambling at that point because you might be overexposed to the stock market, right? So we want to make sure that you're in your range of comfortability, whether it's 80% stocks, 100% stocks, 60% is all based on how much you can stomach. And also the time frame we have until your kids go to college. What is the market environment today and the potential outlook from now until when the kids go to college? And how many children do we have, or how many children do we plan to have in the future? So these are definitely some important points to consider before even starting our funding plans, whatever they might be. We also want to keep in mind the funds available during the college years, right? So of course, there may be ways to use leverage dollars, whether that's through scholarship or strategically thinking about student loans. We don't want to go blind and have student loans because we have to, but maybe there may be opportunities to strategically leverage maybe 1 year of student loans or 2 years of student loans with the proper planning, right? So regardless of how robust your college funding plan is, it's important to keep in mind the traditional funding options that could be available, such as grants, scholarships, and student loans. Unfortunately, we can't predict the future. We don't know if our kids will have that scholastic or athletic scholarship. We also don't know what the student loan rate will be when the time comes, right? Accounting for these options early and strategically can help you with the proper planning. Some more important questions to ask when we're figuring out our plans is which option best fits our budget and aspirations today? Will our budget change in the future? We can also project out how is our income going to increase as time goes on? And how does that affect how much we put away for college, right? When our income goes up, our 401k contribution goes up, the same thing should happen with our college funding plans for our kids, right? Do you want flexibility in your plan? If so, how much and what type of flexible accounts should you consider? How will taxes impact our plan? We've talked about a few things. Inflation is a huge threat to our college expenses in the future. Taxes also are a huge threat, right? Which of our plans are tax advantaged, which are not? And then once again, we can't predict what tax rates will be when they go to college. So how do we strategically pull money out when the time comes? If you're stuck with only taxable assets, you don't have that choice, you don't have that flexibility. But if you put funds into multiple different vehicles, some are tax advantaged, some are not, then you can pick and choose which ones to pull out of when the time comes. And that, of course, also goes towards the retirement. Same strategy should be applied when we put our college funding plan together. We want to make sure it's as tax advantaged as possible. And then how can you leverage multiple options to build that well-diversified plan? Like I said in the last slide, potential scholarships, and then also potentially leveraging a smart debt vehicle or student loan debt within your control, right? Doing it because you want to, because it fits your planning versus doing it because you have to. And once again, it's never too soon to start planning for your kids' education. It's also never too late, right? So even if they're 5 years away, doing something now is better than doing nothing at all, of course, but we also want to be smart and strategic about it. So a few more slides here before we get to questions. I'd like to take a minute and leave this slide on the screen. Some really important websites that you can go to get some information about what we've talked about, which is education cost, potential future inflation, potential options. What are the different investment vehicles and savings vehicles? So salliemay.com is great for looking up, what are the student loan landscape is. Educationplanner.org, studentaid.ed.gov, the FAFSA website. Of course, many people in our community, because of the income, we tend to not qualify as much, and I'll let Appa talk about this, but that's also, there is potential, but you never know. So you want to also look at that option as well. www.ed.gov, savingforcollege.com, collegesavings.org. And then of course, you can go to our website, newyorklife.com, and look up the college funding tab to see exactly how to start thinking about your options. So that's all I had. I know we're at the 30-minute mark in terms of the presentation. I think this would be a good time to open it up for a Q&A. And then we can end it with some few last words from our side about how you can get in touch with us.
Folks, this is really, wealth of information on financial planning. Please feel free to post questions. And given that this is the second segment, and you will also try, in case if it's possible, we'll also try to let you talk if it's needed. So with that, is your dad going to talk?
Yeah, he's available for the Q&A as well.
Oh, Q&A. Okay. We did receive a few questions ahead of time,
Okay.
so I can start with that. And
Sure.
Thank you for the, the comprehensive view of what's available there. And what I really liked is there are 2 points. One is that the bucket are how do I say, the options. Don't put the egg in one basket. That aspect I really liked. And it's really important because I was thinking 529 is the only option.
Yeah.
Coverdale has limitation, like you said, we won't be qualified for FAFSA. Similarly, it is very hard to qualify, or, the Coverdale goes only so far, right? But having this options of or the 4 different buckets, diversification is the key here. So it's not only in stock market, it's also here, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I really like that. And the resources, thank you so much. And I hope folks have, noted it down and or took a picture of it because the resources are really important. And I wish I had that when I started for my older kid, because it is actually daunting when you start looking at the college cost.
Yeah.
You don't realize it until you really get to that, like how much it really is, especially if it is not in state. Then if you're looking at out of state and the travel expenses, it all adds up. It's not a small amount. So with that, there was one question, I think you did mention it, how late someone can still start, like, a senior or in high school or later in middle school is an okay time. And especially when someone realizes that it's too, they have missed it and just a traditional savings is not going to work. And if they're in the 11th grade, how can they, address it?
Sure. Yeah. So I think obviously the best time is as soon as your kids are born or within a few years. That's the optimal time because you have the most amount of time to grow in the market and also in other savings vehicles. Middle school is not the worst time either. There's still enough. There's about 10 years from middle school that you have until you get to college. So you can have some good growth there. And then as a senior in high school, junior in high school, then your options become limited, right? And you're limited to more of the safe assets, because if you put money into something in the market and then all of a sudden it drops, then you're in a worse position than you were when you started, right? So our goal, and when we talk about this with clients, is as the time goes on, right? Even with our retirement portfolios or any investment portfolio, the longer the time horizon, the more risky we can be. But as we get closer to that end date of the time horizon, whether it's the retirement age or the age that they go to college, each year we want to reduce the risk so that the growth that we had is protected and captured, and then the remaining amount can continue to grow, but the gains that we had are slowly getting protected until time to liquidate and use the cash. So if your kids are in the senior year of high school or junior year of high school, I would recommend probably a savings account. Or even a bond account. There's not too much risk, but of course, anything in the market you have to be wary of when they're that close to using it. When you're younger, definitely want to have more of the money towards the risky side. But once again, starting the savings conversation in the middle of high school is still better than nothing at all, right? At least to cover those expenses leading up to college, or even the first year of college if your income allows for it. that debt that the students incur and they have to take on. Of course, as parents, especially in our community, we're very supportive and we want to help our kids pay the loan off most likely. But those debts have interest rates that you don't really have control over. You can refinance, but there's no guarantee. So that's another thing to think about is even if you save your kids from 1 year of debt by starting in 10th grade or 11th grade, that can make a huge difference when they get out of college. Once you get out of college, it's a whole new world. I can tell you that from experience, right? You grow up in school for 22 years and all of a sudden you're thrown in the real world. Yes, you might have some internship experiences, but nothing prepares you for everything that comes at you once you graduate college. If you add the student loan debt on top of that, it can be a huge stress point, right? So that's the intangible thing beyond the numbers and the data. That's the intangible thing that we don't really think about, which is the stress that it happens after you have the student loan. So anything you can do to minimize the student loan debt is what we want to do, even if our kids are maybe 2 years away from going to college.
And there is the 529 you mentioned, and it is somewhat of a black box to understand what it is. Mm-hmm. Every banks offer, and we also hear other states offer, and mm-hmm. there is a scholarship program within California. So can you talk a little more in depth about it? Because the question is, how does our California scholarship compares with the other program? And if someone is looking at 529, what they should be looking at?
So actually and Appa, you can add to this, but there's not too many benefits from a California resident perspective. So you can pick a plan from any state and you're going to get the same amount of benefits. I mean, there's other states that offer specific benefits to their residents. But from a California standpoint, what we found is that our California plans don't offer anything more beneficial than any other state plan. So what we recommend is you can look up all the different companies that offer 529s. And that's what we help our clients do is, okay, we have a list of clients, list of companies, vendors that have different plans, right? Each plan has its own set of mutual funds, has its own set of maybe market investments that are allowed for you to enter into. So you can, if you have your favorite companies that you work with, maybe your retirement is at Fidelity or whatever it is, American funds, if you like those companies, look into their plans, see what investment options are there, and choose one that you like, right? Each company has its own fees. At the same time, you also want to consider what's called a target date fund. That's very common when you're not working with a financial advisor because it's a set it and forget it type option. Is basically it reduces in risk over time. But what we found when you do that is there's some gains that you miss out on in those middle years that you could have had if you had a more actively managed strategy, which is where obviously we come in. So from a California perspective, you're safe to pick whatever state you want. And then once you do, the money that goes in is like a Roth IRA after tax. If you use it for college education or higher education expenses, it's tax-free. If you use it for anything else, then there's possibly 10% penalty, and then you obviously pay taxes on the gain. And that's why I said, you don't want to put all your money. And that's something that a lot of clients bring up when we talk to them is how much should I put in my 529? Right? If your budget is $1,000 per month, chances are you should not put all 1,000 into the 529 for college, right? Maybe half of that, or it depends on your situation, but you want to, like I said, diversify across the multiple options so that if those unexpected, not unexpected, but we all want our kids to have scholarships, right? That's the number one choice. If our kids all get scholarships, then all this money is locked into the 529 plan. That's kind of a bad financial move, right? So that's why we want to protect against those scenarios, protect against possibly getting FAFSA or possibly getting college being reduced because of the government forces, or being completely free because of government forces. Those things happen down the road, and your money is locked up in a 529. It can be very tough. So that's why we want to say, of your budget, set aside some of it towards 529, but probably don't want to do all of it into the 529.
Is there anything that your dad wants to add? You're unmute. You have muted.
Vanakkam.
Vanakkam.
Yeah. the 529 வந்து ஒரு advantage இருக்கு definitely, which is merit scholarship இருந்தால் if you get a merit scholarship equal to that amount can be pulled out of 529 without subject to penalty. But there are many different scholarships, right? So only with a merit scholarship, obviously, you can take that amount of that much money out of 529 without being subject to penalty. So that's something I would like to add. And then, I mean, in our experience in our office, with our clients, and all I can say is based on my experience, also being in the industry as well as being a father and having my second child is almost out of college. Having 2 kids gone through college, all I can say is starting early to save. It probably will ease the pain, and also systematically putting money away, and then working with professionals will kind of give you a roadmap to manage your risk tolerance, and then use the tax history advantages, and sort of handhold you through the process. So it's one less thing to worry about if the time comes. So that's like that.
Thank you. There is another comment is, our question is, having savings account or even 529 accounts impacting scholarships, eligibility for scholarships. And it's not FAFSA. It is, they're looking at eligibility for scholarships or any other financial aid based on merit. So what can you say about that?
529 definitely is not counted dollar for a dollar against not able to qualify for scholarship. I mean, financial aid. At the same time, if it's a UGMA account or gift, if the money is under the child's name, it definitely limits them from that perspective. But 529 is not counted that much against it. And the other thing that he mentioned, one of the options is the cash value life insurance, right? So people, for many reasons, you can do that. At the same time, money in cash value life insurance doesn't count against anything, right? When you apply for FAFSA. So that's another place to keep the money against, against not counting for FAFSA. So
I see at least one question or 2 questions are there, but I have one more. We'll go for another 10 minutes until 7:15 before we wrap up. So another question is that Roth IRA being a vehicle for this. So I think at one point Annamalai mentioned that too. So how are you looking at Roth IRA as one of the options for college funding?
So actually, when I said Roth IRA, what I meant was it has the same tax status as 529 in the sense that after tax dollars goes in, tax-free money comes out. But we generally don't recommend that because the Roth IRA also has a limit of $6,000. And the gain, if you pull it out early before you're 59 and a half, that's subject to a penalty, 10% penalty. So what you have access to in a Roth IRA before 59 and a half, because that's set up and given benefit by the IRS for your personal retirement, you can only touch it completely tax-free or completely penalty-free after 59 and a half. If your child goes to college before you turn 59 and a half, you only have access to the principal, and then anything you use in the principal is taken out for college, and that hurts your own retirement, right? So those are 2 separate things in our books. If you plan properly, you don't have to touch the Roth IRA money. That's kind of our position. So if you set up the proper plans, talk to the proper professionals, then your Roth IRA and your 401k, those can be actually for your retirement. And then the college funding accounts can be for your college funding, right? We don't want those buckets to mix.
Okay, there was one question. Looks like that's a little bit outside, or whether cash value is included or excluded with the face amount in whole life for death benefit.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a very common question also. Appa, if you want to take that one.
One more time, can you repeat the question? Please?
Whether cash value is included or excluded with face amount in whole life for death benefit. I think it's a little outside of college planning, but still it's like
on a whole life policy, when the death occurs, what is paid out is the insurance value, not the cash value. But at the same time, the death benefit, the life insurance amount can be much higher than what they started out with. So it may not equal, to the cash value, but it'll definitely be more than the initial, what we call is a face amount, which is the beginning amount. So it's either or, if we are strictly using cash value life insurance for college education purposes, we are looking at the ideal situation. The person systematically putting money away and is growing on a guaranteed basis, plus on a non-guaranteed additional growth. And then the person putting the money away lives and pulls the money out and sends the kid to college. And the unideal situation, obviously, if the death occurs or the disability occurs, then the plan becomes self-complete, or there's additional funds for the family to put the kid through college. But cash value is a separate bucket, and the insurance is a separate bucket. If the death occurs, what's paid out is only the insurance value, not the cash value, especially on a regular whole life contract.
Okay. And there was one comment Annamalai made, which is like additional options that were available, but that we are not covering it here. Can you briefly touch upon this? And this is the last one, going to be for this session.
Sure, yeah. So the additional options that we didn't talk about is just opening a UTMA or UGMA account in the child's name, right? And that's just a minor investment account. So you can also open one in your own name, but you can also set it up for your kid in their name and have additional investments put in there. There's no limitations for how much you put in every year, and there's no limitations on what you can use that money for. But of course, the gains, everything in there, the dividends, that's all taxable. There's no tax benefit either. So it's fully accessible, no limit, but there's no taxable advantage in that account. That's also a popular option alongside the other tax advantaged accounts, right? So you have multiple buckets. Some of them are taxable, some of them are tax-free when college comes around.
UGMA was one of the prime instrument that was, a plan that was available when I, about 10, 15 years ago. But once the 529 came, UGMA kind of lost its charm. So people use 529 and then cash value life insurance against the downside protection combination. So that became more popular.
Can you expand what does it stand for?
Unified Gift to Minors Act.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if it is accessible, just my personal note, even if you're disciplined or in saving, but having that access, it's little, in case if there is any other emergency, then you take it, you access it, right? I mean, that is also kind of a downside, of course.
That's
when the child becomes 21, it becomes their own money.
Oh, okay.
And then it is counted 100% against their FAFSA eligibility.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so but it is a place to put money away, but it may not. So like Thambi Sonnamari, it's not the one. We don't want to keep all your eggs in one basket. You want to have, each one has its pros and cons. So we want to diversify our money as much as possible and try to get there, because some of them may not be able to take risks. Some of them are willing to assume more risks. So we really work with every individual based on how much they can assume in terms of risk and what their income situation and their budget and the whole thing. So
I think we are come to the end of the session. This is really helpful, very comprehensive, and thank you for laying out the full.
Arivali has his hand up, I think.
Oh, okay. We can't hear you. Sorry.
No. Actually, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Now we can. Yes. Go ahead.
I had my raised hand before. So, two questions. I mean, one is first of all, thanks a lot. I mean, Annamalai, a senior engineer, right? முதல்ல நீங்க சொல்லிருந்தீங்க, அதாவது if it is 529, if it's a merit scholarship, you can take money out of it which equals to that merit scholarship, right? When you say take money out of it, what do we mean? I mean, do we take it out for other usage or just for the college? We got a merit scholarship.
ஆமாமா, இப்ப வந்து ஒரு let's say merit scholarship ஒரு 10,000 கிடைக்குன்னு வச்சுக்கோம். அந்த அளவு நீங்க you can take 529 ல இருந்து 10,000 வெளிய எடுக்கலாம். வெளிய எடுத்து நீங்க you can use it any way you want. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay. So அதாவது general rule வந்து if you take money out of the 529 for non-qualified expense, which is Kambi was kept saying higher education, right? So if you don't use it for higher education, you get the 10% penalty, and then it becomes taxable, the growth, right? And now scholarship கிடைச்சதுன்னா அதுக்கு ஈக்குவலான அமௌண்ட் வெளியே எடுக்கலாம். நீங்க எடுத்து நீங்க எப்பயும் யூஸ் பண்ணிக்கலாம், as long as you can account for it. Merit scholarship.
Good point. I mean, I didn't know this. Okay. And then one more question, which I think you answered it, but let me ask it again. So when we talk about, opening up a new account under the kid's name, because right now they are all minors. Okay. So தனியா ஒரு அக்கௌண்ட் கிரியேட் பண்ணி அவங்க பேர்லாம் நானுமே பண்ணிக்கிட்டு இருப்பேன், but it's still I am the owner because I am the major, right? So அது நீங்க சொன்னீங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன், when it becomes 21 or 18, I mean, when they become, then it becomes their money and then I can't.
Only Unified Gift to Minors Act account.
Unified Gift.
Yeah, UGMA account, which is the other options that Sudhindra was alluding to, and Junior spoke about it. So அது வந்து UGMA ல இருந்தால் மட்டும்தான், 529 ல அப்படி கிடையாது.
ஓகே புரிஞ்சுதுங்க, நான் பார்த்துட்டீங்க, சாட்ல போட்டாரு அவரு. ஓகே, தேங்க்யூ, நான் படிக்கிறேங்க. நன்றிங்க, வேற எதுவும் இல்லைன்னு.
தமிழ் மன்றம் நான் வந்து I just wanted to add something, அதாவது தமிழ் மன்றம் is doing a phenomenal job of alerting people and making them be aware of this. நானும் 40 வருஷமா இருக்கேன் இந்த ஊர்ல. So as each year goes by, the new committee does, they take on and do a much better job, in my opinion. So they keep, the entire community be aware of this. பல விஷயங்கள் பண்றீங்க. So என்னுடைய பாராட்டுக்கள் ஒண்ணு. So I just wanted to say, எங்களுக்கு கொடுத்த வாய்ப்புக்கு ரொம்ப நன்றி. We'll continue to work together and make the community a better place.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much for your words. And it's again, one group does one session, and then it's how it is received, how well it is applicable to the community. In பார்த்துட்டு அதிலிருந்து இருந்து, then we all take it and we try to expand on it.
Yeah, தமிழ் மன்றம்ங்கிற பொறுப்புல இருந்து வரும்போது, even though we are sponsors, we are business people, but you're making the community become aware of this and helping them to become aware and plan, start early and stuff. So even if it's not us, starting early, the rule's the same. Starting early eases your stress and pain. So if it's not us, you still go ahead and plan with anybody else, but get started as soon as possible.
Okay.
நன்றி பழனி. தமிழ் மன்றத்தை பத்தி நீங்க சொன்னதுனால சொல்றேன். பழனி, ஜூனியர் பழனி, நீங்க எல்லாருமே தமிழ் மன்றத்துக்கு நிறைய இன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கொடுத்துருக்கீங்க. இது இல்லாம பழனியோட ஃபாதரும் தமிழ் மன்றத்துல இருந்திருக்காங்கிற மாதிரி நான் சமீபத்துல கேள்விப்பட்டேன். சோ பரம்பரையா நீங்க தமிழ் மன்றத்துல உங்க தொடர்பு இருக்கிறது ஒரு சிறப்பு.
ரொம்ப நன்றிங்க.
ரொம்ப நன்றி.
Organizations that I joined when I came. நான் வந்த வருஷம் 1980 தான் ஆரம்பிச்சாங்க தமிழ் மன்றம். நான் வந்த வருஷத்துல முதல் வருஷம் கலந்துக்கிட்டேன் அதுல. ஸோ அதுல இருந்து லைஃப் டைம் மெம்பரா தான் இருக்கேன். ஸோ ஈவன் தோ வருஷம் உங்களை மாதிரி எல்லாரும் வேலை பார்க்கலனாலும் ஏதோ I'm still involved.
ஒரு எங்க சுதந்திரா சொன்னது போல ஒரு 5-6 வருஷமா பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம். இந்த நிகழ்ச்சிகள் எங்களுக்கு ஒரு ஆக்சுவலா கிரீடத்துல மகுடம் ஏத்துற மாதிரியான ஈவெண்ட். இது எல்லாமே இந்த காலேஜ் இந்த கிராப்ளிங் வித் அப்புறம் ஃபண்டிங் எப்படி பிளான் பண்றது, இது எல்லாமே ஒரு கேப், ஒரு பூதாகரமா பயமா இருக்கும். ஸோ ரொம்ப நன்றி வாய்ப்பு கிடைச்சதுக்கு. பிளஸ் நீங்க இப்போ உங்களுடைய அடுத்த தலைமுறையும் கொண்டு வந்திருக்கீங்க. இதுதான் வாழையடி வாழையா வருது. ஸோ ரொம்ப நன்றி. நீங்க வந்து அப்புறம் இன்னும் ஒரே இது வந்து 1993ல நீங்க பொருளாளராக இருந்திருக்கீங்க. நீங்க வந்து சொன்னீங்க நீங்க தான் ரைட். ஸோ அதனால வந்து ரைட். ஸோ அதனால வந்து சரியான இடத்துல பேசிக்கிட்டு இருக்க நல்ல வாய்ப்பு இருக்குது. எங்களுக்கு வாய்ப்பு கொடுத்தமைக்கு நன்றி.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It goes both ways. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really nice having a father and son, and it kind of sets an example for other families too, other people too. Like you don't need to. It's especially in college planning, seeing this, right? And முதல்ல computer science மட்டும் தான் பேசிட்டு இருந்தோம். இப்போ வந்து you can also do it differently and do it really well. அப்படிங்கிறது வந்து இது ஒரு பெரிய எடுத்துக்காட்டா இருக்கு.
ஆனா நம்ம இளைய தலைமுறைகள்லாம் வந்து எல்லா I mean I know the college planning advisors வந்து they spent a specific amount of time on computer science. ஆனா என்னுடைய அனுபவத்துல நான் பார்க்கிறேன் நம்ம இளைய தலைமுறை எல்லாம் கொஞ்சம் கம்ப்யூட்டர் சயின்ஸை விட்டு வெளியிலையும் போறாங்க படிக்கிறதுக்கு மற்ற சப்ஜெக்ட் மற்ற ஏரியாஸ்லயும். So it is really nice to see that.
உண்மைதான். நான் ஆக்சுவலா அந்த நீங்க அந்த பாயிண்ட் சொன்னது மட்டும் ஒரு கிளாரிபிகேஷன் பாயிண்டா சொல்ல விரும்புறேன். நாங்க பொதுவா நான் இது 6th இயர் நானே இது கோஆர்டினேட் பண்றது காலேஜ் பிளானிங் ப்ரோக்ராம். ஸோ அதனால எனக்கு முதல்ல இருந்து பார்த்தது என்னன்னா பொதுவா ஜெனரலா தான் எல்லா சப்ஜெக்டையும் தான் பேசிட்டு இருப்பாங்க. பட் ஆஃப் லேட் வந்து இந்த கம்ப்யூட்டர் சயின்ஸுக்கு வந்து ரொம்ப ஃபோக்கஸ்டா கொஞ்சம் நிறைய கேள்வி வந்ததுனால இன் ரெஸ்பான்ஸ் டு தட் இந்த முறை வந்து அவங்க அதுக்குன்னு ஒரு எக்ஸ்பர்ட்டா இருக்கிறவங்களை கொண்டுட்டு வந்து பேசலான்ட்டு இது பண்ணாங்க. அப்கோர்ஸ் எல்லாத்தையுமே கவர் பண்ண முடியாது இல்லையா, அதனால ஒரு ஸ்பாட்லைட் பீஸா தான் அதை வந்து இன்னைக்கு வச்சிருக்காங்க.
கம்ப்யூட்டர் சயின்ஸ்ங்கிறது வந்து நம்ம சமூகத்துல ரொம்பவே இன்வால்வ் இருக்கிற ஒரு ஏரியா. ஸோ நான் சொல்றது ஒரு 20 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால 25 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால எல்லாம் நான் ஏதாச்சும் ஒரு பார்ட்டிக்கோ எங்கேயோ ஒரு கேதரிங்கோ போனேன்னா நான் மட்டும்தான் ஆட் வாலா இருப்பேன். ஏன்னா ஃபைனான்ஸ் இன்சூரன்ஸ் அப்படின்னா மற்ற எல்லாருமே கம்ப்யூட்டர் சயின்ஸ் தான் இருப்பாங்க, எல்லாம் ஐடி இன்ஜினியர்ஸ் தான் இருப்பாங்க. ஸோ அது நம்ம சமூகத்துல அது அதிகமா பயன்படுத்துறோம் அந்த 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 ஏரியாவை. இருந்தாலும் புதுசா அடுத்த இளைய தலைமுறைகள் கொஞ்சம் மாறிட்டு வர மாதிரியும் தெரியுது எனக்கு பாக்குறது.
கண்டிப்பாக. ஏன்னா என்னோட பர்சனல் எக்ஸாம்பிளே அந்த மாதிரி தான். பட் ஐ டோன்ட் வாண்ட் டு கோ இன் தேர். நானும் என் ஹஸ்பண்டுமே டிஃப்ரெண்டான ஃபீல்டு, என் டாக்டரும் டிஃப்ரெண்டான ஃபீல்டுக்கு தான் போயிருக்காங்க. ஸோ அதனால ஐ கேன் சி தட். அதனால அவங்களுக்கும் ஒரு ஃபியூச்சர் இருக்குது அப்படிங்கிறது வந்து ஒரு நம்பிக்கையில தான் எல்லாம் போயிட்டு இருக்கோம். ஸோ இதெல்லாம் ஒரு இதை எடுத்துக்காட்டு. எனிவே வித் தட் மிக்க நன்றிங்க. அண்ட் கோவிந்த் அண்ட் அறிவொளி ஃபார் கீப்பிங் ஸ்டேயிங் வித் அஸ். And Bomu is here, nammoda IT support. Without him we cannot really facilitate such nice professional level programs. So thank you everybody, and thank you for all the attendees. We still have quite a few hanging in here, so really thank you for all of you, and I hope Tamil Mandram is able to provide a very informative session here, and you all learned a lot. And again, and the UC Easy portion will be in the recorded YouTube, and unfortunately the financial planning will not be because of the restrictions they have, but I hope you heard enough information and took some notes. With that, have a good evening everyone. Nandri.
Thank you.
Yeah, நன்றி, அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி.
Thank you.
ரொம்ப நன்றி.
Thank you.